Daf Yomi Aleph. We're right after the two dots. We just said b'maykim miflagi. We're up to Bishlam el Rav Yishmael. But let me just review of how the Gemara got into its discussion. The Mishnah said this cryptic line of Bakol Sheichtim, La'olam Sheichtin, Hakol Sheichtin. These three words: Bakol, Hakol, La'olam. So the Gemara explains that Hakol Sheichtim refers to chickens, meaning you have to shecht all forms of animals that are kosher, even chickens. Sure. Okay. Then what's la'olam? You always have to shecht. So he said, "As machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva." According to Rabbi Shmuel, in the midbar, you are not allowed to just shecht an animal for Chullin. It's called basar taiva. Basar taiva means I just want to eat steak. In the midbar, you are not allowed to do this. You had to shecht a karbanos only. Then, when they entered Eretz Yisrael, they were allowed to shecht regular meat without being a karban. So the Mishnah is saying that after the churban, la'olam sheichtin, we still shecht, meaning you're allowed, not just shecht, you're allowed to eat basar taiva. Fine, that's Rabbi Shmuel Shita. Rabbi Akiva doesn't like this, because Rabbi Akiva says, when was there a time in Klal Yisrael's history where you couldn't have steaks? That's ridiculous. Rabbi Akiva doesn't believe that during the midbar you weren't allowed to. So how does he interpret the Mishnah? He says like this: in the midbar, you didn't have to shecht. You could pierce the neck of the animal. As long as the trachea and esophagus were cut, it didn't have to be a smooth cut, it didn't have to be a kosher shchita. You could take a gun and shoot him in the neck, it's kosher. They entered Eretz Yisrael, things change, and now you have to do a shchita lamaisa. Comes the Mishnah, la'olam sheichtin. Even after the churban, we don't go back to that heter of piercing, la'olam sheichtin. Meaning that you have to continue shechting in the proper method. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. The point is, I don't know. The point. Yeah, I guess so. Obviously, I mean, he might make it up. Point is, that's Rabbi Akiva Shita. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't like this because Rabbi Shmuel says, when was there a time period in Klal Yisrael's history where you could pierce the neck? You always have to do a shecht. Oh, so now the Gemara says, Bishlam el Rabbi Yishmael. I understand Rabbi Yishmael that again, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that. You're only allowed to shecht in the midbar. You were only allowed to shecht for a karban. But when you did for karbanos, you had to shecht. According to Rabbi Akiva, did you have to shecht in the midbar? No, you could pierce. Says the pasuk, "V'shachad es ben abokar." In the midbar, they shechted animals. According to Rabbi Akiva, why are they shechting animals? I thought you could shoot them in the neck. Says the Gemara, "El Rabbi Akiva my v'shachad." According to Rabbi Akiva, why does it have to say v'shachad? It could even be piercing. So the Gemara answers very simply: Kodshim shani. That pasuk is not referring to that pasuk is referring to karbanos. Even Rabbi Akiva, who believes that you could pierce the neck, that was when you're eating chulin. When you were eating a carbon had to be shechted properly. This pasuk that references a proper shechita in the midbar was talking about karbanos. Not related to Rabbi Akiva's discussion at all. Rabbi Akiva's heter of piercing the neck was only for non-karbanos. Okay. Bishlam el Rabbi Yishmael. Let's go another raya to Rabbi Yishmael. Hainu dechsiv hatzayin v'habakar yishachet lahem. The pasuk says, now this is not referring to karbanos. The pasuk is saying, this is when Moshe Rabbeinu, it's an interesting back and forth. Klal Yisrael want meat. Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Hashem, Hashem's unhappy. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, even if I had the meat, I had the tzayin and bakar, I'm supposed to. How am I going to supply enough tzayin and bakar? And even to Hashem, how are you going to supply enough tzayin and bakar? Not karbanos for everyone. Now it says, so it's not talking about karbanos. It's a v'shachat. So why say v'shachat? It should say piercing. So the Gemara says, "My v'tzayin v'shachat yinachal mebayle nechir shalom zushchitas." The Gemara says, well, that's what it means. According to Rabbi Akiva, v'shachat does not mean a proper shechita. You could pierce it. When the pasuk says v'shachat, it just means killing the animal in the way that Hashem wants it. It doesn't have to be a proper shechita. It could be a piercing. No, that's what the pasuk means. The pasuk's not going to list every possible way you kill an animal. It's v'shachat is included of all permissible ways of preparing the animal. Another raya. Bishlam el Rabbi Yishmael hainu d'tanan. Okay, this is an interesting kasha. According to Rabbi Yishmael, there was never a time in Klal Yisrael's history where you could pierce the neck of the animal. According to Rabbi Akiva, there was, but it no longer applies. So Zak the Gemara. The Mishnah says, Hashoichib in esnavel biyadeh. If you shecht an animal and you mess up, and it turns into a nevela, there's a mitzvah called kisei adam. Kisei adam means you have to cover the blood of a chicken or a chaya. Let's say you're doing a shechita and you mess up. It becomes a nevela. It's messed up. Do you have to do kisei adam? No. Zak the Mishnah, hanoicher. Let's say you pierce the pipes of the neck of the chicken. meaning you don't actually do a shchita, you just do a piercing. It's not a good shchita. V'hama'aka, or you tear out the pipes with your hands. All of these are not forms of shchita. Potem l'chasos is no kisei adam. So what's the kasha? The kasha, the Gemara says, Rav Akiva amai potem l'chasos. The Gemara argues the following argument. I think it's a pretty immediate rejection. But the Gemara argues like this. According to Rabbi Yishmael, there was never a time in Klal Yisrael's history where piercing was a kasha shchita. So I get why you don't have to kisei adam, because it's not good now, and it was never good. But according to Rav Akiva, that there was a time period in Klal Yisrael's history where it was considered a kasha shchita. So even though now I can't eat it, I should have to do kisei adam because it was a shchita 3,000 years ago. So the Gemara responds, who cares what it was? You're right. In the midbar, that was a proper preparation of the animal. And if you taka did in the midbar, you would have to do kisei adam. But now that it's aser, it now reverts being nothing. Meaning the Gemara assumes that according to Rav Akiva, because it was something thousands of years ago, it should be something now regarding kisei adam. And the Gemara's response is, Hayil ve'itzar itzar. But now that it's aser, it's nothing. So the fact that it was a shchita thousands of years ago is irrelevant. Right now it's not, and therefore right now there's no mitzvah kisei adam. You only have to do kisei adam when it's a proper shchita. It's a pretty, Let's go another raya, but this time it's for Rav Akiva. Rav Akiva says like this. The pasuk says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Klal Yisrael that when you enter Eretz Yisrael, you're going to be able to eat meat, and it'll be like the deer and the ayil. Meaning the same way the deer and the ayil that you ate in the midbar, you'll be able to eat you'll have so much meat when you enter Eretz Yisrael. Now, according to Rav Akiva, it makes a lot of sense. Why? According to Rav Akiva, there was never a time period where you couldn't just have an animal. You could always eat animals. You didn't have to bring karbanos. So now the pasuk is saying when you enter Eretz Yisrael, the same way that tzvi and the ayil, we're always an option. Now you're just going to be able to do that with more animals. You have much more accessibility. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, you weren't allowed to eat. I thought you weren't. The pasuk clearly indicates, very simple, just to simplify it. The pasuk indicates that they were able to eat a tzvi and an ayil in the midbar. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, I thought you were only able to eat karbanos. Tzvi and ayils are not karbanos. According to Rabbi Akiva, you were allowed to eat any animal that was kosher. You didn't have to be a karban. So fine, I was able to eat a tzvi and ayil in the midbar. The only change according to Rabbi Akiva is the piercing or the shechita. Fine. But you were always able to eat a tzvi and ayil. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, I thought you were only able to eat karbanos. So how is Klal Yisrael eating a tzvi and an ayil? I thought you were only able to eat meat if it was brought as a karban. Tzvi and ayolos are not karbanos. So I don't understand. So how are they able to eat a tzvi? How are you able to eat deer and venison when deer and venison are not karbanos? So the Gemara is going to respond, according to Rabbi Shmuel, if the animal is raw for a karban, it must be brought as a karban, and you can only eat meat of a cow when it's brought as a karban. A tzvi, a deer, which is never eligible for a karban, was eligible to be eaten in the midbar. Meaning this restriction, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that you could only eat karbanos in the midbar, were of animals that were able to be brought as a karban. An animal that is not eligible as a karban, a buffalo, a bison, whatever it is, then in the midbar Yitaka could eat it. Even Rabbi Shmuel would agree to this. It's not. So the fact that the pasuk says you could eat it tzvi and an ayil in the midbar is not a stira. I thought you had to eat karbanos. The answer is, if the animal is eligible to be a karban, you have to bring it as a karban, and you can't eat it as a non-karban. If the animal is not eligible as a karban, then you can eat it stam. And even Rabbi Shmuel agrees you can eat it stam. No, Lavdavka. According to this, you'd be able to eat a chicken in the midbar.
We know we have to shecht. We previously learned.
Yeah, but you have to shecht it. That's not a question. According to Rabbi Shmuel,
we don't have to shecht.
No. So the point is, according to Rabbi Shmuel, the emphasis of la'olam shochtin is only on animals. Meaning, according to the animals that were never karbanos, the Mishnah doesn't have to address that. We required shechita in the midbar, but you were able to eat it as non-karbanos, and that remains the same. The la'olam shochtin would have to be animals that are eligible as karbanos. You're right. You'd have to twist Rabbi Shmuel's sheet a little bit. So says the Gemara, according to Rav Akiva, that they never asered regular eating of animals outside of karbanos. You could always eat a steak in the midbar, so that's what it means. That the same way in the midbar you ate the tzvi and the ayil, so too you'll eat other animals, indicating they ate the tzvi and the ayil in the midbar because they were never allowed to. There was never outlawed eating animals. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, they are only able to eat karbanos in the midbar. How are they eating deer? It's not a karban. So the Gemara responds, the Torah only forbade eating meat of an animal that is eligible as a karban. a cow, a lamb, a sheep, which is eligible as a carbon, you have to bring it as a carbon if you want to eat some of the animal. But animals, deers, venison, which are not eligible as carbonos, even Rabbi Shmuel agrees you can eat them in the midbar. So when Rabbi Shmuel said that the animals that were outlawed in the midbar outside of carbonos were only animals that were eligible to be carbonos. Again, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it was never the piercing. It was always shchita. His point was, what changed was in the midbar, you were only able to eat karbanos. When they enter Eretz Yisrael, you're now allowed to eat all animals that you want. You don't have to be a vegetarian. And the chiddush of the Mishnah is after the Churban, we continue eating animals. But the Gemara is now pointing out that even Rabbi Shmuel, in the midbar, you were only outlawed from eating animals that were eligible as karbanos. But an animal that was not eligible as a karban, chicken, you can eat chicken in the midbar. It was never a problem. Rabbi Kiva holds that animals were always eligible. The issue is the piercing or the shchita. Huh? Well, no, I mean, conceptually they had man, but then they asked for meat, and they had the slav. The point is they could eat meat, conceptually. It never asered eating meat. We talk about this. It never asered eating meat. The Torah gave them man. According to Rabbi Kiva, they could also eat a steak if they wanted to. I'm not saying they ever wanted to, but conceptually they were able to. This next Gemara, by the way, I think to me it's like a tremendous chiddush. It's funny, Rav Asher Weiss, I was once listening to a shir right after the war started. He was talking about shilas that came up in the the Gaza October 7th war, and he said that because Klal Yisrael never really had an army before since the times of like Yechezkel, Chizkiah, like we haven't had an army in thousands of years, these shilas never really came up. Because you would have Jewish soldiers that were in the Russian army, but you never had this is the policy of the army, because there was never a Jewish army before. And he said the shilas that he was getting right after the war were like chidushim shilas, and that was, he said they're in Gaza, and they go into someone's house, they're taking over a house in Gaza, and there's non-kosher meat in the fridge. Can they eat it? And you think the shilah, and he mentioned something, I think he mentioned this. I did not know this. When they were kovish Eretz Yisrael, for the 7 years that they were conquering Eretz Yisrael, they were allowed to eat non-kosher food that they found in the houses of the Canaanites. That's a first for me. It's apparently a Gzeres HaKasev. Apparently it's just the Torah allowed it. Not mitzad pikuach nefesh. It doesn't seem that it was mitzad because soldiers are pikuach nefesh. That might be a heter now, that listen, a soldier has to be able to eat and you can't just tell him to fast. But it seems that they were mater for 7 years. Any chazer that they found in the houses was mutter. We'll see in a second. I can't answer more because I didn't know that this existed until about a few moments ago. According to Rabbi Kiva, that there was a shift. In the midbar, they were able to eat pierced neck meat. And then when they entered Eretz Yisrael, it had to be shechted properly. What if a guy has a cooler? As they're entering Eretz Yisrael, he has a cooler of meat that was pierced neck. And now he enters Eretz Yisrael. Does the pierced neck meat become aser? Do you say, well, now that you're in Eretz Yisrael, you have to eat a proper shechita? You say, no. It was kosher when it was prepared, so I can continue eating it. That's the kasha. Mahu. So the Gemara says, I don't understand the shayla. During the 7 years that they were kovish Eretz Yisrael, you could eat chazer. Which, by the way, the Kapella, they entered Eretz Yisrael, and it's you'd think that would be like the highest, like a chasana, the highest. You'd act the best. They eat a chazer. So the Gemara says, "Emas if it's the first 7 years that they were kovish Eretz Yisrael, hashadavar tamei yishtarlu. They're able to eat non-kosher animals." Because the pasuk says, "Ubatim malayim kol tuv." The pasuk says that Hashem says when you enter Eretz Yisrael, all the good in the houses you could take. Now, when I read that pasuk as a kid, you think money. No. All the good means you go into the fridge, you find a good pork chop, eat it. So they're allowed to eat pork chop. You think that they can't eat a kosher animal that was pierced neck, which was kosher at the time? I thought that if they're eating bacon, they could eat, Says the Gemara, costly the chaziri, bacon, pieces of slabs of bacon. So if they're able to eat bacon, they could eat pierced neck. Now, by the way, so the Gemara says, you're right. The shaila was if they prepared, he had a cooler of meat that lasted past the 7 years. After 7 years, they find meat that was 7 years old. Yeah, and the question is, can they eat it? That's the shaila. Or Iba Yisema, or the Gemara says, really, it's right away. It's not 7 years. I thought during 7 years they could eat chazer. The answer is no. According to the first mahalach of the Gemara, 7 years basically was just it's kind of free fall. Non-kosher, kosher, it's all fine. According to the second answer, no. Iba Yisayim, the Gemara says, La'olam Mishev Shekavshu. Ki Yishtarilu, when the Torah allows chazer or non-kosher during those 7 years, is shalal shaloiv dikachavim. It's not that the Torah just permits it. You see, the first mahalach of the Gemara assumed before, the Torah basically just allows non-kosher for those 7 years. Basically, it's the Torah way of saying, when you're conquering Eretz Yisrael, don't worry about kashrus. Do your thing. Now, if that's the case, then pierced meat is for sure fine. The answer is no. According to this, the Torah never matered non-kosher conceptually. The Torah allowed you to take the booty, the whatever you found from the enemy's home, you could take. If it's non-kosher, it's non-kosher. You can't have a non-kosher Jewish-owned restaurant. Meaning, during those 7 years, it's not that we remove the requirement of kashrus. It's a special dispensation that when you go into an enemy's home, whatever you find in that home, you can keep if it's non-kosher food. But if you bring non-kosher from the midbar, it's a problem. Meaning, it's not that non-kosher is mutter. There's a special heter. Whatever you conquer in those homes, you can keep. But if a guy can't just import bacon into Eretz Yisrael during the 7 years, that's not a heter. And therefore, if the neck is pierced and you have a cooler of meat, kenzayin, it is a shail. And the Gemara says, huh?
If they're in Gaza or someplace like that, you find food, how long can you eat it for? Is it for 24 hours or for a week or what?
Say it again?
How long does it have to last?
How long can you eat it for?
During those 7 years.
No, he's like in Gaza. They went in Gaza.
Oh, I have no idea. I have to check. What did Rav Asher Weiss? I think Rav Asher Weiss said that because pikuach nefesh that they're able to, if they don't have meat, it was pikuach nefesh. But once they got, it was the beginning of the war where they didn't settle in yet. They didn't bring food. It was just they were running. So then just whatever you find, if you have to, I don't know. We'll talk after this. The Gemara says shalal deduj teku. Okay, so teku we're not sure about the cooler of meat. Sort of, I know, but it's a fast Torah that I don't think people know about. So the Gemara says, yeah, I guess so. Amar Rabba, Shanisa. Okay, here's the issue. The Gemara and the rest of the daf after this is pretty simple. The Gemara has the following problem, and it's a very diuk of a lashon. There's 3 lines of the Mishnah. The Mishnah had these 3 cryptic lines, 3 cryptic phrase. The one was Hakol, La'olam, Ubakol. Okay, so we've explained 2 out of 3. Hakol is chicken. La'olam is that you continue shechting meat after the churban. What's bakol? Now you're going to say bakol shechting means any instrument, meaning it doesn't have to be a knife. It could be a flint. It could be glass. It could be a sharp grass, reed, whatever it is. Here's the issue, and that's what I would have said. The Gemara has a problem with this because the Gemara says then the syntax is not really great because you have 3 statements. One is about to include chicken, so it's including the type of meat. The second one is that we continue shechting meat even after the churban, so it's meat. So it's meat, instrument of meat. The Gemara feels that that's a little off. 2 out of 3 is about the subject of the type of animal being slaughtered, or that you have to continue slaughtering said animal. And then the third one is the instrument. It's just a little bit weird. It's subject, instrument. The Gemara feels that that's a little off. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabba, Shani Sakol Sheichtim Leilim Sheichtim. You've explained 2 out of the 3 statements. Bakol Sheichtim Amishanis. So how do you explain Bakol Sheichtim? So the Gemara says, Chitema, Bein Bitsur, Bein Bitschuchas, Bein Bikrum Shakana. That Bakol Sheichtim means the instrument. The problem is, Hadum Yidahana Chitani. Then the third one is not like the other 2. Ihanach B'Sheichtim. The first 2 are about the subject, which is the person or thing, meaning the person shechting or the animal being shechted. It's about the subject. Hainami b'shochtim. Then the third one should also be in that. In ihanach b'nishchotin, and if the third one is about the instrument, hainami b'nishchotin, then the first 2 should also be the instrument. So the Gemara says, you know what? Scrap everything we did over the last daf. The 3 are very simple. It's not la'olam after the churban, and it's not Rav Yishmael, and it's not Rav Akiva. It's very simple. These 3 things is following. El Amar Rava, hakol sheichtim. The first one is chadal asu yikuti, the chadal asu yisrael mummer. Hakol is the type of person. Who can shecht? Even a kuti, even a mummer, i.e. the first 2 dafim of the Masechta. So hakol is the person. Then it says la'olam sheichtin, that's the time. So it's like oilam shana nefesh. So the first one is the person. Who can shecht? The second one is when you can shecht, i.e. bein bayom, bein balayla, bein barosh, bein rosh hagag, bein rosh hasfina. So the first one is the person, and the second one is the time and place, and then the third one is the instrument. So now it's person, time and place, instrument. So now each one is definitively separate, as opposed to 2 out of 3 being about the subject of the steak.
So that means none of these are talking about the subject then.
Correct. At least each one is different. So says the Gemara, it's an eclectic group. Okay. Now, from here until the end of the daf, I would actually say, I actually think it's good. I sent it to a couple of people. I don't want to send it to the Daf Yomi chat because I don't want to start sending videos. I don't want to become that chat. It's sheer only. But all daf from the OU has this new thing where they usually have like pretty interesting videos about the daf. So Chullin, they have this one Chassidish guy. I like this guy. Very hard to understand because it's Yinglish, but he's constantly wearing. And I also like the fact that he wears the butcher stuff with the the bonnet, and he's clearly a shaykhid. He has not put on a white new one for the videos. It is covered in blood. There is a cow's neck. You see him holding something against this large black orifice, and you don't know what that is, and then you see drool coming down, and you realize, oh, that's a cow. And you're like, is he going to shecht it? He doesn't. But he goes through the sugyas. He shows every video. He has about a 45-second video on each daf. So this next daf, it's kedai to watch because he shows you the begimas. The begimas are the notches in the knife that causes issues. So he'll actually show you. He'll take the knife. So there was one ha'ara that he made that explained sugya in the Gemara, as we'll see in a moment. Chutz me magol kotzer magrero. Okay, so the Mishnah said you're not allowed to use a magol kotzer magrero, which are serrated, because the issue is that tears the neck of the animal. It doesn't cut it. So the Gemara wants to know what type of notches in the knife is a problem. So the Gemara says Avu de Shmuel pagam b'shadar. Avu de Shmuel was interesting. What he would do is he would take knives, make different types of notches in it, 5 or 6 notches, and send it to the Rabbanim and say, which one's okay, which one's not. And they would send it back, and then he would make different types of notches, and he would mark it down. That was his way of, sending in the mail. So the Gemara says, Pagam Meshadi kept on saying this. Sholchulei, this is what their response was. Kimegira shaninu. The issue is when it's a saw. Meaning, the Gemara is going to explain in a moment, but what this means is when the notch is in the shape of a V. See, when you have the notch in the shape of a V, then when you go this way, it'll catch it, and when you go that way, it'll catch it. It'll be caught in both directions. You could also have, ArtScroll actually has a picture. When it's the shape of a V, that means it'll be caught this way and it'll caught that way. When it's like this, so it's more of a isosceles triangle, maybe. I don't know, maybe. The kitzer, then it only will get caught in one direction. In the other direction, it's smooth, but it'll get caught only in one direction. So it says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanon, Sakin sheish begimas harbe. If a sakin has many notches, go to the next page. Tidan kimagera. Then it's a problem. Then it's like a saw and it's an issue. Meaning, if it has many notches, by the way, it doesn't matter what type of notch. If there's multiple notches in the knife, you can't use it. But let's say the knife has one pegima, or one notch. Here's the rule. Oigeres psula. Oigeres means if it's shaped like a V, then it's puzzle. Misuchseches. But if it's only misuchseches, which means it has one notch in one area, it's sort of like a 90-degree angle, so then when you go this way, it'll be caught. But when you go that way, it won't be caught because it's smooth in that direction. And again, he has in the video, he has a seseches, and he shows you it. So then it's going to be kosher b'diavad, as we'll see in a moment. Now, by the way, the Gemara is going to clarify why is it kosher b'diavad, because even though it won't get caught in both directions, it'll still get caught in one direction. So the Gemara is going to explain that when it's kosher b'diavad, is let's say the begima is over here. It'll only be caught, let's say when I pull it all the way back, but if I go forward, it won't be. Let's say that's the type of begima. So then it's only kosher if you only go forward. Meaning the knife has to be long enough that you go only in one direction, because even when there's a notch, a seseches, it'll get caught if you go back and forth. So it has to be where you're able to kill the animal where you're only going in one direction. The knife is long enough. Because any type of begima, any type of notch, if you go back and forth, you'll catch it. The beauty, the issue of the V notch is that it'll get caught in both directions, so there's no option for you to do this or that. But if it's the type of notch like this, then it'll only become caught when you get to the very end. But if you go like this, it won't be. So if you're able to kill the animal just in one direction, then it's kosher. The Gemara is going to point this out. The Gemara says, Hechi dami egeres, hechi dami misoseches. So Amar Rav Elazar, Oigeres mishtei ruchos. Oigeres is a V notch which catches in both directions. Misuchseches meruach achas. Misuchseches only gets caught in one direction. Ma'ishna mishtei ruchos. The Gemara says, I don't understand. If it's one directional, why is it kosher? You'll still get caught in that one direction. So Ma'ishna Mesuseches, the Mursha Kama Machlish, or Mursha Basar Baza, Meruach Achas. Meaning, what's the issue with the V-notch? Because whichever direction you go, it's going to catch the skin and tear it. So the one direction notch also, you're going to catch it that direction. The Gemara says, "Churv the sakina machlish Mursha Baza." So the answer is the kol maresh the sakina. The answer number one is that one notch is at the very tip of the knife, so you could actually not use it. Meaning you don't have to. You could avoid that part of the knife that has it. Or says the Gemara, but soif as the Gemara says, yeah, but even if it's at the top of the knife, when you come all the way back, you'll catch it. I mean, let's say it's at the first 20% of the knife. So you say, okay, I'll start 25% in. Yeah, but when you come all the way back, you'll eventually catch it. So the Gemara says, it has to be where the knife is long enough where you can kill the animal without actually touching that part of the knife. So the Gemara says, Amarava, Shalish Midas Pesakin. There are three different types of notches. Oigeres, which again, Oigeres means that it's a V-notch that the nail catches on. By the way, that's what we're going to see in a moment. The definition of a notch is that when you put the nail stops. Meaning if you're flowing back and forth, even if it's like a microscopic notch, that's nothing. It has to be that the nail gets caught, the nail stops. Oh, no, you're not. Lo yishchad. Oh, you could actually, I don't care. But, yeah, sure, I don't care. Lo yishchad. V'im shachat shchitasei psula. But if you shecht with an ageris, with a V-notch, it's puzzle. Misuch seches, that notch which is on one direction, and the knife is long enough that you don't have to use that area of the knife, then lo yishlach haba l'chachila. It's not l'chachila, because obviously if there's any notch in the knife, it's not l'chachila. V'imshach ha'shchidas ha'ksher, but the Yevet is kosher. Oil v'yoyer b'sakin, and a knife that has no notches at all, meaning that the nail is able to flow back and forth, then it's sheich haba l'chachila, and it's kosher even l'chachila. So it says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Huna Breder Rav Nachman Lechemia L'Ravashi Amalei Mishmei Derava Mesuseches Psula. So I was told that Mesuseches, which is a notch in one direction, is puzzle. I v'Amar Rav Mesuseches Kshera. But you're also told that it was kosher. So how do you reconcile this? Loi kasha. Kansha hoilech v'hevi. Kansha hoilech v'loi hevi. The answer is that we said before, if the notch is in an area, if you go back and forth and you catch the notch, then it's puzzle. When is it kosher b'di'evet? Where the knife is long enough that you could just go in one direction and avoid that notch, and that's when you kill the animal in such a way that you didn't touch the notch, then it's kosher b'di'evet. The Gemara continues. What if it's no notches? It's an interesting type of knife. It's not serrated, but it's like waves. It's super smooth. It's just like a slow, long wave. But it doesn't actually get to a notch. You put your nail across, it's completely smooth. But just it literally has like a wave motion. The halacha is, the question is, do we say that because it's completely smooth, it's not a problem? Or do you say, well, it's technically not flat, it's not straight? So the Gemara says, Amar lei, man yohev lo mebisa v'achana. You give me meat from that, I'll eat it. Meaning, no problem. Amar Chizda, menayin lebedika sakim in HaTorah. How do I know that you have to check the knife before you shecht it? Shneimar v'shachadatim bozeh v'achaltem. That v'shachadim bozeh, you have to check, make sure this knife is kosher, then v'achaltem. Says the Gemara, what do you need a pasuk for? Pshita. Kivin d'chi nakiv treifa b'y bedika. I don't understand. What's the chiddush of the pasuk? The chiddush of the pasuk, you have to do bedika? Well, if you have a knife that doesn't have bedika, and the knife happens to have a notch in it, is it puzzle? It's treif? Yeah, it's treif. It's a nevela, whatever. So avada, you have to do bedika. I need a pasuk to tell me do bedika? You have to do bedika because if you don't do bedika, it's going to be treif. I don't need a pasuk for this. So the Gemara says, meaning it's a davar pashut. It's like, how do you know you have to check the mikvah? Well, it has to have a certain amount. If you don't have a certain amount, it's puzzle. So you have to ensure that it doesn't have it has 40 saws. Well, what's the chiddush? So the Gemara says, l'chacham kamrina. No, what's the source in the Torah that you have to show a rabbi? So says the Gemara, wait a minute, I thought if you remember a couple dafim ago, we had the obligation to show a rabbi is just for kavod. You don't actually have to show it to a rabbi. A shaychet is neman, eidecha nem bisurim. So you're telling me there's a source in the Torah you have to show the rabbi the knife? I thought the whole point of showing the rabbi the knife is just to show him kavod to the rav. So says the Gemara, the answer is midrabban across machdbalma. You're right. This pasuk is not actually the source. It's an Indian derabanan to give kavod to the rav, and this pasuk is just a nice remez. He actually in the video, in a moment, I'll point out, he says, I guess it's like a Masar B'Sheich, and this pasuk Bazeh has an interesting remez of how they practically do it. The Gemara says, B'Marava Bodkila B'Shimsha. In Eretz Yisrael, they would examine it by the sun. I guess they would point it by the sun to see if there were any any notches. Interesting. In Narda, they would examine it with water. Apparently, if you take a knife that has no notches and you slice the top of water, the ripples will be, I guess, even, as opposed to if there's a notch, it'll cause a little bit of a wave. So they would do it in a bucket of water, and that was the way they would check. The Gemara says, Rav Sheshis, when I was doing daf last night, I said out loud, I don't know if anyone in my family heard, I said, how's Rav Sheshis doing this? Rav Sheshis badikla bereish lishna. Rav Sheshis would test on the top of his tongue. Okay. Rav Acha ber Yaakov badikla b'chut hasai. Rav Acha Yaakov would test it on hair. He would roll a hair over it to see if the hair would get caught. Besura amri, and how do we paskin? Bisura achla. A knife cuts flesh. Bisura labadka. You need flesh to check, meaning the finger. If the top of the finger, you have to check the top of the finger. So I saw. Okay, we'll do a little bit weiter, and I'll tell you mitzias. How do they do it? No. This shaykhit said no. They check it on their palm. So the finger is too. They want to go closer. Why not just do it on the veins? Why not just do it on the? I'm going to check it on the carotid. It's crazy. Now I'll tell you. No, so I'll tell you. I did. So maybe she tell me. How does it not cut you? I'll tell you in the video. The video said that they don't know how to do. It's a chassidish shaykhut, so maybe there's difference chassidish shchita or not. He said we don't know how to check on the finger without causing ourselves to bleed. So he says what they do is they just double up the nail. They do the nail twice. They use the nail, but instead of, as the Gemara is going to point out, you're supposed to use the nail and you're supposed to use your finger. They just do double nail. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa, tzricha bedika abisra v'atufra. The knife has to be examined on the finger and on the nail, and atlasa rucha, and on three sides. So that means that you have, the knife is very sharp, so you have to go over, I think he explained like this, it's back and forth is considered one. Back and forth with the finger, then the side of the knife back and forth, the side of the knife back and forth, 6 times, then use the nail. Even his nails were not long. I have longer nails than he does. I was surprised how short his nails were, and he's going back and forth. And I know, I'm aware of that. So anyway, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, that's 12. He says the remez is bazeh, Zion Hay is 12. That's what he said. I know you're not putting pressure. It's still something that feels very unpleasant to me. And Bekitzer, he says again, that was the sheikh from the All You Daf. He said that they don't do it on the finger anymore. They just double up the nail. The Gemara continues. Amr Ravin Rashi. Amr Rav Samber Eder Rav Masharshi and Mishmach. The Amr Mishmei the Rava. Tzricha bedika bisav atufa tlasa rucha. You have to check with the finger, on the nail, and on 3 directions. Amr lei. Abisar atufa amri. He said, I did say. Meaning they asked him, did you say that? So he said, I said the nail and I said the finger. Atlasa rucha loy amri. You don't have to check the sides. As we're going to see in a moment, if you remember earlier in the daf, in the Masechta, we referenced if you have a hot knife, and we said it's fine because the sharpness comes before the heat. So the Gemara says, yeah, but what about the sides of the knife? The sides of the knife will burn the esophagus and the trachea. And if you remember, the Gemara had said that the esophagus and the trachea pops open. So if that's the case, I don't have to check the sides for begimas, because as long as the top, which is super sharp, is flat, I don't care if the sides have notches on them, because you'll never get there, because the second it cuts, it'll pop open. So that's why he says you don't have to check the sides. Some say, or some say, he said, no, I said you had to check the sides, but I didn't quote Rava. You're quoting me in the name of Rava, it wasn't the name of Rava. Let's just finish up. The Gemara says, Ravina v'Rav Acha b'rei the Rava haviyasi kami the Rav Ashi. Ravina Rav Acha were in front of Rav Ashi. Aisu sakin l'kami the Rav Ashi l'bodka. They brought a knife in front of Ashi for examination. Amrli Rav Acha b'rei the Rava bidka. So Rav Ashi didn't want to check. I guess he wanted to see how they do it. So he says, you check. Bodka tufa bisa tlasa rucha. They use their nail, they use their flesh, their finger, and on all 3 sides. Amrli yasher. Well done. And that's how Rav Kahana. I mean, I guess that's his test of how they would do it. He wanted them to practically do it, and he said, "Oh, you did good." Rav Yemar Omar atifra bisu tzricha atzlasa rucha loy tzricha. Rav Yemar says you don't have to check the sides. Why? Because as I said before, the second you cut the trachea esophagus, it pops open. There's no need to check the sides. The Gemara explains. What's the source for this? Because if you remember the beginning of the Masechta, if you take a hot knife and you shecht it, it's kosher. Why? I thought you're burning the esophagus of the trachea. Because the knife's sharpness precedes its heat. But says the Gemara, we had a kasher in the Masechta. Then what about the sides of the knife? They'll burn as they go. And the Gemara's response was that when you cut the esophagus and trachea, they pop open. And therefore they're not touching the sides of the knife. So that same reason does not require a bedika, because the second you cut it, it'll pop open. Just to finish up the daf, Amr Avuna Barav Katina Amr Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Shalosh begimasin. We have a Messiah that 3 notches are an issue. You'll think we're talking about shechting an animal. No. The 3 notches are begimas etzem bepesach. You know there's an issa deraisa of breaking the carbon pesach bones. Even if you don't break the bone in half, but you make a notch in the bone, meaning you what's it called, a fracture. You fracture the bone, that's an issa deraisa. Secondly, pegimas oizim bebechar. Even if you make a notch in the ear of a bechar, we know that if a bechar behema has a notch, it's not roy as a carbon, and the kohen gets to keep it. That's called a balmum. So even if there's just a notch in the ear, that's a balmum. And pegimas mum bekachim, and all carbonos, not just a bechar. Bechar has a very special, unique halachas when it comes to mum. But any animal, if it has a notch in it, just a crack in it, in the ear, just a notch, you take a little hunk out of the ear, that's enough to say that it's a balmum. So those are the 3 times that we mention a mum. By a Karm Pesach, a balmum for a bechar, and balmum for karbanos. The Gemara of Chizda says, Af begimasakin. Chizda said, why don't we just add the more classic one, that there's a notch in the knife that will invalidate shechita. So the Gemara says, why did the other opinion not mention this? The idach bechul lekamayri. The other one responds, I'm not talking about chulin, I'm talking about karbanos. You're right, that's a good one, but I'm talking about the 3 that are related to karbanos. Just to finish up, the kulon, how big of a notch is it? We've talked about notches, but how big of a notch is a problem? It has to be the same notch that would disqualify the mizbeach. The mizbeach also had to be smooth. If there was any notch in the mizbeach, it's puzzle. The same size and knife would invalidate the mizbeach. So it says the Gemara, "V'kama begimas hamizbeach," and how big is that? Kedei shetigra bar hatziparin. If the nail gets caught, that's you check the knife and the mizbeach also. If on the mizbeach you would put your nail on the side, if it got caught, then it's puzzle. Now, just to finish up, the Gemara says, wait a minute, is he telling me that a mizbeach is an issue even if there's a tiny notch that would invalidate the walls, the size of the mizbeach? The corners, and flat part also, everything. It was flat. It was perfectly. So the Gemara says, "Wait a minute, huh?" I guess so. They would have to smooth it down so it was perfectly flat. So it says the Gemara, "Wait a minute." Meisvei kam begimas a mizbeach. Doesn't the Brisa say how big of a notch invalidates a mizbeach? Hashem ben Yichai Omer tefach. You could have a notch up to a tefach. A tefach is like a 3 to 4 inch chasm. So what are you talking about? Rav Elazar ben Yaakov and Mekizayis. These are much bigger than catching the nail. So the Gemara says, "Loi kasha ha besida ha ba'avna." The answer is they're talking about 2 different parts of the mizbeach. There's the stone of the mizbeach, and then there's the lime on top. The lime on top, you could have a hole up to a tefach. The stones, I guess that were under the lime. It was stones held together by lime. The stones had to be smooth mamish. The lime that held together the stones could have cracks in it up to a tefach or up to a kazayis.